Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and finally, we have ourselves our first trade of the 2019-20 NBA season, and it is the Utah Jazz receiving Jordan Clarkson in exchange for Dante Exum and 2 second-round picks. Now, this is a huge deal because, of course, we haven't had a trade since all the way back in the summer with the Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook swap plus some picks, which I talked about in a previous video. We finally have a real actual trade to talk about, and I'm so excited to. And I'm going to talk about this from both teams' perspectives in terms of the short-term as well as the long-term impacts of this trade, as I'm going to for most, if not all, of the trades throughout this NBA season. I'm just so excited to finally talk about this stuff because this is the thing that I probably love most about the NBA is the trades and the player movement. But with all that stuff said, let's just go ahead and get right into it. So first, we're going to talk about this from the perspective of the Jazz because personally, I think it's more interesting. So essentially, you're getting a younger player in Dante Exum that does still have some potential. Still a young player, still under 25 years old, still someone that could potentially be something down the road for this Jazz team initially. He's been a constant disappointment since being a top 5 pick. He's had his moments, but has been often injured and hasn't improved enough on the offensive end to really warrant this team sticking with him for much longer, and they're trading him along with 2 second-round picks for a veteran guard in Jordan Clarkson that should make them better in the short term while also providing some long-term salary benefits that I will get to. So for Exum, this is a disappointing end to his tenure in Utah because, again, he just was never able to get it together. The emergence of someone like Donovan Mitchell, as well as some of the other good guards that they've had come through, has kind of pushed his development back, and he was really supposed to be the guard that was going to kind of lift the ceiling and the potential of this team, and ended up being Mitchell down the road. So they traded him in for a player in Clarkson that makes this team better immediately. And whatever opinion you have of Jordan Clarkson is fair. He's had some chemistry issues in Cleveland. He's had some issues in terms of wanting to shoot too many shots. That's definitely been a thing. But if you're thinking about a veteran guard that can score off the bench in an ideal situation, if Jordan Clarkson ends up playing in his ideal role, I think this is a really good addition for Utah or for really any contender around the league. They're getting a guy that's comfortable coming off the bench, that can definitely score the ball and can provide some perimeter playmaking on a Jazz team that is specifically off the bench, definitely needs that and needs that guard depth. And again, Exum really wasn't giving this team anything. He'd only played in 11 games, a little bit over 2 points per game, basically was a complete non-factor for this team to this point in the season, and a player that they never really knew if they were going to be able to count on because of his injury issues. But now they're getting a player in Clarkson that's going to be a part of their rotation, that's going to be able to score the ball for them, and assuming he can make shots off the ball, I really like this move. Now, in terms of the long term, there are some interesting benefits to this for the Jazz as well, because Exum was signed to a contract for next year as well, making around $9.5 million, while Clarkson is an expiring contract for this season. And assuming they don't bring him back, they'll go into the 2020 offseason with around $10 million in salary cap space based off the projections that we have right now, with the most notable free agents being Clarkson, Royce O'Neal, and then Manuel Mudiay and Jeff Green. So not too many huge free agency targets in terms of who they'd want to retain, and that gives them a significant amount of space to try and improve their team in the offseason or just potentially re-sign Clarkson depending on how well this goes. So those are all the positive things. You're getting rid of a rotation player at Exum that hasn't really done anything for you this season, is continually injured, plus 2 second-round picks in exchange for a player in Clarkson that ideally should be productive and a scoring guard off the bench who also is an expiring contract. Some of the negatives, however, I'm a little bit worried about Jordan Clarkson's fit on this Utah Jazz team just in the locker room. There have been some issues in Cleveland. Some of the rumors have said that maybe he is the one starting, some of the negative things being said about John Beilein as coach. So those things could definitely be an issue. And you don't want to bring in a guy that's going to mess up the chemistry. Now, I think the Jazz have a good enough culture to push those things away, but that is a negative that I could think of off the top of my head for this trade. Moving on now, let's talk about this for the Cleveland Cavaliers. So again, this is a pretty typical thing. You have a team that's not very good, that was good a couple of years ago, that has these veterans that they want to trade, specifically on an expiring contract, in this case with Clarkson, and ideally you want to get some kind of draft compensation and or a solid young player. And in this scenario, just because Clarkson isn't that valuable of an asset, they're getting kind of some iffy things in return, but some things that make sense given the situation that they're in, because Dante Exum is still a player that has potential, and there have been plenty of guards specifically throughout NBA history that have not performed super well with their first team after being high draft picks and have then ended up being really good players down the road. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen with Exum, but the tools are at least there that got him, drafted in the top 5 initially, if he can just stay healthy. He's still someone that's a pretty good athlete, someone that has a really good wingspan, is going to be able to defend well, needs to get stronger still, but on paper should be able to work on his shot and his playmaking and be an at least solid two-way guard for this team moving forward. And then you're getting the 2 second-round picks as well in exchange for a player in Clarkson that was not in this team's long-term plans and could have potentially also been causing locker room issues for them as well. So this makes complete sense for a team in the situation that the Cavs find themselves in, where they have some veterans that they want to get rid of, and they get a nice young player in Exum. And on top of that, they get a nice young player in Exum that is under contract for both this year as well as next on a reasonable salary, just $9.5 million. The Cavs are going to have more cap space than they know what to do with regardless, especially if they can dump Kevin Love's deal here in the offseason. So it's not really a huge deal in terms of them immediately getting this cap relief because, again, Clarkson wasn't expiring anyway. So having a player like Exum under contract gives him plenty of time, a little bit over a year and a half, to prove himself as a potential future piece for this team, because as you're looking at them, there's not a ton to be excited about on this Cleveland team. I mean, you've got Garland, you've got Sexton, but there's not really a ton else to point to and say, this is, you know, a franchise that's moving in the right direction. Unfortunately, that's kind of one of the negatives here. If Exum does end up being something good for this team, it might come at the expense of one of their rookies. It seems like they have a lot of potentially good players in the backcourt and not a ton in the front court now with Exum. So unless they're planning on playing all 3 of those guys at the same time, I don't know. But that could either hinder the development of Exum not having as much of an opportunity as he was hoped to have on a new team when healthy, or potentially take away some minutes from their 2 young guards, probably Garland more so than Sexton. So a couple of positives and negatives here for both teams, but in general, I think this is just a typical really good deal that makes sense for both sides. And on top of that, it's also important to note that these pieces that they got in exchange for Clarkson could be used in a trade down the road as well if they wanted to. Exum has a movable salary, whether it's this year or next year. The 2 second-round picks could be nice to kind of help a team along in terms of taking on Kevin Love or Tristan Thompson or whoever else they want to trade away. So these are all really good things for Cleveland, really good things for Utah, and in general, just a really good deal. And there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.